Jeremy, Tommy Robinson is mobilising the far right this Saturday.
You mean Stephen Yaxley-Lennon?
What do you think are some of their grievances?
Well, what they're doing is classic far right, neo-fascist, racist stuff of observing the economic problems that exist. They're huge. The issues of inequality, poverty, homelessness, overcrowding in schools in some parts of the country, all that is true. Is that the fault of Muslims? Is that the fault of the black community? Is that the fault of refugees? Absolutely not. It's the classic blame the minority for the problems of the majority that are not created by the minority, but created by an economic system that is directed largely by greed.
The trade unions will be out in force, they'll be
Yes.
counter-protesting. Do you think that's the right thing to do?
Yes, and I will be there myself on Saturday joining in that counter-protest. I remember going back many years, if I may, very quickly. 1977, the National Front was starting to march in London. National Front, Nazi Front, marching through London. I was in Hornsey at the time. I was the Labour Party organiser in Hornsey, and together with the late, great Bernie Grant, we decided that we would oppose their march. They were turning march to Wood Green. We would organise a demonstration on Duckett's Common, Turnpike Lane. What did I get? But a call from the Labour Party. Jeremy, we'd rather you didn't do this. Can you call it off? I said, why? They said, because it might damage our chances in the elections. I said, what? And they said, well, the fact you're having this demonstration against these people. And I said, have you read the history of Germany of the 1920s and 1930s? And they said, what's that got to do with it? I said, well, go and read it, then come down and phone me back. And rung off, and that was it. Of course we went ahead with the demonstration, 5,000 people came, and it became the start of a big anti-racist movement, and not long after that the Anti-Nazi League was founded, and we had this huge anti-racist movement in the 1970s, which brought people together. Our counter-demonstration on Saturday will do exactly the same, bring people together to say, these people have no answer to the social problems people face. These people are only interested in division and attacking minorities.
Would you say that the economic conditions of now are similar to those of the 20s and 30s?
In absolute terms, no, because technology, etc., has moved on. In the issues of relative levels of poverty, they are moving in those directions. When a constituency like mine, which has an image of being relatively well off, it isn't actually, but it has that image, 45% of our children are living in poverty, where we have, I last counted 15 food banks across the constituency, and we just had Parliament specifically voting not to remove the two-child benefit cap, and also to support the government's ludicrous position of taking away the winter fuel allowance. So we've got a sort of direction of travel which enshrines in the economic strategy inequality, injustice and poverty, and we've got the far right out on the streets saying this lot are not delivering for you, it's all the fault of refugees.
Would you say that the white working class is being let down?
I would say the working class has been let down. I don't like using the term white working class, black working class. Workers are those that do not own the means of production, and it is all about working class unity, and that's where your point a couple of minutes ago about the trade unions being there on Saturday is so very, very important.
And looking ahead to the budget, I know that you've called for a rather radical tax policy to put capital gains in line with income tax.
Yeah.
What sort of effect would you think that would have?
Well, the effect of it would be to raise considerably more money for the government. It would raise that money, which could then be spent on, for example, ending the two-child benefit cap, could then be spent on ensuring there is a winter fuel allowance for all those that need it, could also be spent, crucially, on dealing with housing conditions in this country. Yes, there's been some good move in the sense of giving some degrees of security of tenure in the private rented sector, that's good, but unless we control rents and build a lot more council housing, then the housing crisis will remain the intensity it is at the present time and lead so many young people into being unable to save or indeed going into debt just to survive.
What do you think would be your ideal budget? What sort of policies would you implement that would be different,
I would
aside
like
from
a
the tax?
chancellor to do what was done in the post-1945 government's budget speech, when Dalton set out his idea of social justice in society, and he framed the budget around that and said, this is what we're trying to achieve. And he then defended what were then very high rates of high income taxation. He was right. He set it out in that way. What I would like to hear is a chancellor who comes and says, okay, we've got this situation. We've got all these children living in poverty. We've got all this overcrowding. We've got these huge degrees of mental health, which in part are caused by depression brought about by economic situation. Not totally, but in part. I'd like to have a chance that would set out that and say, right, this is what we're going to do. This is why we've got to reduce inequality in our society. But instead, the whole direction of travel seems to be the government saying we're proud to be the most pro-business government ever. I want a government that's saying we're proud to be the most pro-equality government ever. Wouldn't that be a nice thing to have?
Just switching topics now. Keir Starmer is in Samoa today. He is meeting with leaders of the Commonwealth, and he'll be discussing the future of the Commonwealth. Do you think that each country should have a decision over whether they are in the Commonwealth or not?
Each one?
Each country. Should they be allowed a referendum over whether they would like to be in the Commonwealth?
Well, that's up to each country to decide whether it has a referendum or not within its own constitution.
Mm-hmm.
They are all there. All those that are there are obviously members of the Commonwealth, and that's their decision to be members of the Commonwealth.
What would you say? Is it outdated?
I think it needs to work out exactly what its purpose is, because it has both expanded and contracted at the same time. Some countries didn't join the Commonwealth on independence. Some who were only very much in part colonial presence of Britain, such as Cameroon, Rwanda and so on, and Mozambique, joined the Commonwealth. I think it could be a useful tool for promoting development, for promoting global equality. And I think the debate that's now happening in Samoa about reparations is absolutely central to it. If you've got a majority of the members of the Commonwealth countries that were part of the British Empire, in the case of the Caribbean and West Africa and South Asia, contributed massively to the wealth we see all around us here in London. Look at these fine buildings all around us. Then surely it's time to think about future long-term justice, and that's where the whole reparations debate comes in. I've just come out of the House of Commons chamber, where there's a very interesting debate on Black History Month, and a number of colleagues are making absolutely brilliant, impassioned speeches about their family history, the racism they faced, or their parents and grandparents and they themselves faced as children, and the need to have a much stronger anti-racist voice in society, but it's also about global equality. Jamaica was once the wealthiest place in the world that contributed so much to the wealth down there in the city of London. And when David Cameron went to Jamaica as a prime ministerial visit, he was asked about reparations, and he offered that Britain would build a prison in Jamaica. A strange thing to offer to a country whose whole cultural development was coming out of slavery. So let's look at the issue of reparations and justice for the future. Some people have got there in this debate. The Church of England has got there. Glasgow University has got there. Even the British Museum, in its own convoluted way, has recognised that quite a lot of artefacts in the British Museum actually do not belong in the British Museum, but do belong where they've been stolen from in the first place.
On that topic of reparations, Keir Starmer today has said that he's open to discussions about non-monetary reparations. So yeah, no money exchange, no repayment. Is he right?
I've no idea what he means by that statement, and I think he ought to explain it to us. If he means that he wants to set out a trading relationship in the future that ensures countries that are primary producers of coffee, cocoa, tea, bauxite, all the sort of essentials of industrial and modern society, and he wants to set a fairer trading arrangement in the future where the primary producers get more, the middle people get less, and the profits are smaller. I'm interested, but that isn't the same as compensation for what went on in the past. I think the two things have to go together, a fairer trading relationship as well as reparations. Now, previous Labour governments did try to introduce fairer trading arrangements. Back in the 1970s, when Judith Hart was Secretary of State for Overseas Development, she attended the Lomé Convention, which was about fairer trading relations, particularly for African and Caribbean producers.
Would you have offered, had you become Prime Minister, would you have offered monetary reparations?
Yes, so what I would have said was, let's talk about the levels of reparations that we believe are appropriate and correct, but let's also talk about the future relationship. So yes, and I also worked with Dawn Butler on setting up an educational institute to talk about the effects of slavery and decolonising our school curriculum, because if we defeat the racism in the future, we've got to defeat the ideas of European supremacy, which actually do encourage racist beliefs amongst some people. Not all people, some people.
You've been asked there have been calls by some commentators for you to apologise, along with Diane Abbott, over your comments regarding Martin Blake, who was the armed police officer who fatally shot Chris Cabba a couple of years ago. Do you stand by those comments?
Chris Cabba was an unarmed man in a car who was shot dead by a police officer. The issue before the court was solely that. Were the police right to shoot Chris Cabba or not? I didn't believe they were right to, so I stood down there outside Scotland Yard saying that I'm concerned about armed police officers shooting unarmed people on the streets of our capital city. That's why I made the comments, and I stand by them.
Do you think it sets a dangerous precedent?
Sorry?
Do you think it sets a dangerous precedent that Martin Blake has walked free?
Well, it's not the first one. Jean-Paul Menezes was shot dead. Others have been shot dead who were also unarmed by police officers. And so far, no police officer has ever been prosecuted for this sort of behaviour. So I think we need to look at the accountability of the police for the good of the police as well. Because if there's to be trust in the police, there has to be trust in a process which deals with incidents such as this.